Watch your butthole!
Underhell is a mod based on the Half-Life 2 source engine. You don't need to own any of the Half-Life games, you simply need to have the 2007 source SDK installed. Download the mod files and throw them into the source games folder, restart your Steam, and you're ready to go. It's entirely free, with no strings attached. Underhell has been released in two separate parts. Prologue in 2011, and then a revamped version of Prologue, along with Chapter 1 in 2013. This mod is supposed to eventually have 6 different chapters. Chapter 2 is yet to be released, and as mods go, we don't know if it ever will be released, but cut them some slack, mods are free, and they're a lot of work. I'm going to split this mod up into 3 different parts. The house, Prologue and the combat, and Chapter 1, or otherwise known as the Terrible. At the beginning of the game, it is revealed that you are Jake Hockfield, who is coping with the current loss of his wife. The production value for being a mod is particularly amazing. The music jumps out right away, and the intro is smooth and really makes you feel like you're playing a full production game instead of just a mod. In fact, I would encourage you to go listen to the official soundtrack. It's really that good. Your first experience in the game is waking up on your couch in your house. This house is particularly interesting and the atmosphere is a little unnerving. The house never feels okay, but it does feel fairly normal. At least at first. The more you play, the more you start realizing odd things. Maybe the fridge door is open when you come back into the kitchen, but you never left the fridge open. Maybe the cabinets do the same thing. Maybe you noticed a razor blade sitting on your piano that you never left there. It quickly becomes apparent that something more is happening in this house, and the more puzzles you do, the more you start to figure out what it is. As the mod puts it, there are many mysteries in this house. Most of the rooms are locked off, and you'll unlock them by completing more puzzles. The puzzles in this house were never really frustrating. I did get stuck a few times, but when I figured out the solution, my response was, oh wow, I'm dumb, I should have figured that out immediately. My response was never, well how the hell am I supposed to figure that one out? When the puzzle makes you feel stupid, instead of the game feeling stupid, that's when that was a good puzzle. The house's design looks and feels like it could really exist, and each room is distinct from one another, making it easier to go around, never getting you lost as to where you are or where you need to go. If you press tab, it will bring up a hint in the top left, but it doesn't explain the puzzle for you, it just guides you towards the correct direction. As mentioned before, this house does feel like a place that could really exist. It's very immersive. Occasionally the phone will ring and usually the call is directed at Jake Hockfield, but it might be a missed dial or it might be from a 1-800 number. Occasionally you can check your mail and it might be a missed package slip from UPS, or in this game they call it SUP because they turned it around, which got a good chuckle out of me. The house also has a day-night cycle. My only real complaint about the house is that this day-night cycle seems to happen a little bit too quickly. When night comes around, everything obviously becomes darker and the lighting sort of has a blue tint over it. It gives it a distinct look and feel, so when night comes around you know it. When it's nighttime you can stay up longer, or you can go back into your room and lay down in your bed and go to sleep. There's a dream catcher you can activate which will make it so that dreams don't happen and you just wake up in the morning, but if you don't put that dream catcher on, you will start having some nightmares. These nightmare sections are very similar to the quote-unquote acid trips in the original F.E.A.R. They're very atmospheric, they're very immersive, although I was never really particularly scared or freaked out. I'm not necessarily the best judge when it comes to horror games. I can acknowledge what they're going for, but I never stream horror games because I don't have interesting reactions out of them. I never really get freaked out or yell. If anything, I just laugh at the horror elements because I genuinely find them funny instead of scary most of the time.
What the f was that? It's like, alright, I get it's supposed to be scary, but he just kind of ran in and then just yelled in like the most comical yell possible. Then he ran away.
In my defense, that one was actually really funny and not scary, but the mood of the rest of these nightmares is genuinely good for a horror attempt. I did get many comments when I was streaming saying that this was rather scary. The nightmares are supposed to be hinting more at your own guilt, but it leaves this sort of open for interpretation. But all of this adds to a sort of unnerving experience because we can all relate to a house like this. We go through it every day of our lives. That's all I can really say about the house section of this mod. It's done particularly well, and as you do more puzzles, it will unlock more mysteries about the story going on. Just note that once this part of the mod is done, it feels very, not really rewarding, but it feels like it concluded the mystery while still leaving things open to explore in Chapter 2. It definitely felt like a satisfying conclusion. From here we move on to the prologue. Even though it's named the prologue, it's actually around 1.5 hours to 2 hours long, which for a mod is very respectable. Its F.E.A.R inspiration jumped out at me immediately. This game's combat feels amazing. But it's not only the combat that strikes me as being very F.E.A.R inspired. The map design is linear, but every combat arena effectively is a multiplayer arena with a squad of enemies you need to take out, much like what the original F.E.A.R did. The F.E.A.R inspiration is incredibly obvious even in location. I felt that most of the mod was very reminiscent to the hotel in Extraction Point. It even had that spooky ambience in the background. And this feels so satisfying. Even though it's a source mod, it really doesn't feel like Half-Life 2. If you ever played SMod back in the day, it uses a lot of mechanics like SMod, but with its own campaign and balanced in much better. You have your own kick, which I only really used to either kick the helmets off of dead enemies so I could pick them up to add to my own armor or to kick open doors, but it also features the free reticle movement. Your gun will move throughout the screen like, say, Red Orchestra 2. The bullets do go where the gun is pointing, so you may be looking forward, but your gun may be off center, so it'll fire slightly to the right. That said, if you aim down the sights, the gun is going to point where the sights aim, and that is always in the middle of the screen. So even though you can fire from the hip, and you can kill enemies from the hip, it is highly advised that you aim down the sights. Do note the guns in this game have a good amount of kick, but they do more damage. They will kill everything in 1 to 2 headshots depending on whether they're wearing a helmet or not, and shotguns destroy everything. Let me briefly talk about the guns because holy hell do the guns feel good in this game. Very few games nail guns like this mod did. They're loud, they sound punchy, they feel strong, they are strong. Everything kills in a few shots at most, but the enemies also do a pretty hefty amount of damage to you. When I turn the corner and blast someone in the chest with a shotgun, I know they're going to be dead. But I also know if I turn the corner to someone else using a shotgun, I'm going to eat a lot of damage if I don't take them out really quickly. The best way I can describe it is that it has the map design of F.E.A.R with the squads of F.E.A.R, but with the room clearing of SWAT, the aiming of Red Orchestra 2, and the quick deaths of Rainbow Six. It's really one of those things where you can get an idea of it from watching gameplay, but you really won't understand it until you play it. The combat is simply the best aspect of this mod, and it makes me want to go back and play through the prologue again. The game also has an interesting inventory system. It does have the usual armor, and you occasionally find a vest laying around, which gives you a good amount of armor, but you can also pick up helmets off of dead bodies by kicking their head and then picking it up and putting it on. It has the Wolfenstein question of how am I wearing so many helmets? But armor is important. Not only does it negate a good amount of damage, but you'll also be subjected to the occasional bleeding out when you don't have any armor on. Now it's not going to kill you instantly, it's not like Red Orchestra 2 where you had to stop and bandage immediately. It's actually pretty slow, only about 1 damage per every few seconds or so. So you can last a very long time without bandaging yourself. But this is where the inventory comes in. Instead of being like Half-Life 2 where you just walk over a medkit and magically you have some health back, you can pick up a medkit at any time and it goes into your inventory. If you use your medkit, it gives you around 25 to 30 health or so. I don't know the actual numbers, but that will give you the most amount of health. And there are different items. You can get bandages, and if you use a bandage, it will stop your bleeding. You also have probably mentioned this extra bar on the far left-hand side of the screen. This is how hungry you are, and this sounds like an annoying survival aspect thrown into the game, but ultimately you don't starve so quickly that it really becomes a factor. That bar never got below half when I was playing, and I for the most part could have basically ignored it. But the inventory is almost straight from a survival game like DayZ. It's kind of weird and interesting, but it also works in this situation of combat. I never felt like I was stuck on having low health and couldn't get past the next encounter. And if I did start bleeding, I could just use a bandage that I found anywhere else. But this is where all the positives end. Let's talk about Chapter 1, or the Terrible. Chapter 1 is such an incoherent mess that I don't even know where to begin. I guess let's start with the combat. After having such a high-octane, amazing first-person shooter experience with the prologue, Chapter 1 decides that it suddenly wants to be a zombie survival game. Why? If I wanted this, I could have gone to the early access section of Steam. Now, I will be the first to admit that I have never understood the zombie craze. Zombies have bored me. They have always bored me. They're one-trick ponies. They'll run at you, and they'll hit you. That is all they do. They never challenge the player, and they never force you to adopt a different tactic. It's the same thing over and over again. Why would they make interesting enemies? I simply don't understand this. Furthermore, I'm kind of biased because I don't really find the whole idea of zombie apocalypse interesting to begin with, but purely from a combat perspective, they're boring enemies, and without anything else mixed in, that's a very repetitive game. If this was really its only problem, I would ignore it, because that's what they were going for. However, that's not the only problem Chapter 1 has when it comes to the gameplay. Chapter 1 is really, really long. Prologue took me around an hour and a half to beat, Chapter 1 took me around 12 hours to beat, and the rest of that time was for the house. Overall, around 15 hours, with 12 hours of that being Chapter 1, a very repetitive, incoherent mess of an experience. The game did one trick the entire time. Dump you into an area with a bunch of locked doors. You had to figure out a way to open those locked doors, with there being zombies and the occasional zombie horde running in at you. Essentially, they threw you into a locked off area where everything looks the same and you have no map, so you have to wander around wondering where the hell do I need to go, doing specific fetch quests. And the things you need to get for those fetch quests are random, so walkthroughs do not help you. They'll spawn somewhere on the map. Again, you don't have a map on you. There are only maps on the walls. You have to find the map, stare at it, try to memorize it, then figure out where you need to go. It couldn't have just been so convenient that you could pick up a map and put it in your inventory and look at it every once in a while. No, you had to look at a wall and try to memorize it. And since everything looks the same, it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good anyway. You can tell in my voice that I was not having fun when I was playing Chapter 1. At a certain point, I just started playing it so I could beat the game, wondering, will I ever fight any actual interesting enemies? Will I eventually just start playing a first-person shooter? Why am I suddenly doing a survival game? Why did it change? Why did we have such a good first-person shooter experience, and now it's zombie survival? To make matters worse, the story makes no goddamn sense. I should probably mention there is a story in Chapter 1, but I could not tell you what it is even though I had just played it. Again, it makes no sense. It's very dialogue heavy, and that doesn't do a whole lot of good because a lot of the voice actors are really bad. Some of them for a mod are surprisingly good, but when a few bad voice actors are standing out, it drags everyone down. To make matters worse, it constantly does the shooter cliche of you waiting at a door, just waiting for all the dialogue to stop so you can continue. There were even many times where it had me waiting at an invisible wall that I couldn't walk through until the dialogue had stopped. Once again, I did not care about any of my allied units, and I had no idea what they were talking about because the story jumped everywhere. There were constantly plot twists that came out of nowhere and made no sense. For example, we're trying to escape this underground desert facility. All of us pile into a train except for one person, standing outside after the train doors had closed, saying that he needed to go deal with some power source or it was going to blow up like Chernobyl or something. This was never mentioned before. It came out of nowhere and it was literally just mentioned so we could talk about how this character was going to die. Stuff like this happens all the time. Nothing being mentioned before, nothing being overshadowed, just suddenly, oh by the way, this needs to happen now. Your final goal and destination jumps from place to place, and none of it ever makes any sense. Bad story, bad writing, bad dialogue, bad combat, a very repetitive and drawn out mod does not give you any room to have fun. In fact, you don't even see any other enemies but zombies for 80% of Chapter 1, which is a shame, because some of the battles were genuinely interesting. After about 80% of the way through the mod, you start running into human enemies that have a weird cloaking device and can tank a little bit more damage. Not enough to feel bullet spongy, but enough to provide a challenge and be genuinely interesting. Again, there are shades of fear all over these combat encounters. The invisible enemies I'm talking about really remind me of a mixture of the invisible ninjas in the original F.E.A.R. with the replica soldiers. This is a shame because if they took this route the entire mod, it would be one of the best mods I have ever played, but instead it was one of the worst experiences I have ever had. I really don't know where else to go with this. It's just such an incoherent, disappointing mess, and I wouldn't harp on it so much if it wasn't so good in the prologue, just to turn into something so god-awful. If you want to play this mod, please do yourself a favor, do not play Chapter 1. Just play through the house and play through the prologue and call it a day. It's a bit of a shame because Chapter 2 seems to be genuinely interesting. They did show a heads-up preview of what's happening in Chapter 2 at the end of Chapter 1, and it seems very reminiscent to that of F.E.A.R. with all the Alma segments. If they continue that throughout all of Chapter 2, along with some of the combat mixed in, it can go back to being a really good mod. But if they continue what they did in Chapter 1, it'll be a god-awful mess. If I had to give any advice to the developer of the mod, give more freedom to your player, don't add puzzles that are fetch quests, reduce the number of zombies, and please, clean up your writing, or just have less dialogue overall. Just do what you did with the prologue. You don't need to overexert yourself and attempt to do something that you don't have the resources for. If I had to sum up this mod in 2 words, to the prologue and to the house, I would say fuck yes. To chapter 1, I would say fuck no. And that really does sum it up. If you want to see more of this mod, you can watch my entire playthrough, which you should be able to see the playlist right up there. If you want to see the weapon showcase, click on the other link, and that will link you to a playlist that also has the weapon showcase of this mod in it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, leaving a comment down below, sharing the video around. Having YouTube interaction genuinely does help your view count and help YouTubers as a whole. If you frequently watch this channel, please consider joining the Discord down below and getting involved in the community. I frequently talk in the Discord, and you can talk to me directly. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys over in the Discord.